Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 382 of the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. I'm your host, Anthony Renner. The show notes are located at strengthcoachpodcast.com. I have a favor to ask. If you listen to the show, obviously if you're listening to this right now, you're listening to the show, but I just want to get some feedback about the show. I haven't done this. I've never really done this. And I just send me an email to strengthcoachpodcast@gmail.com. You can even you don't even have to write anything. Just put in the subject heading, how long you've been listening. And I might contact you about just some feedback about the show, things you like, things you don't like. Just trying to figure out the future of the show. I've been doing this for 18 years, so I want to figure some stuff out and see if we can go in a little bit of a different direction to kind of, make people get more listeners and to make the show better. And if you don't want to send an email, if you're on Instagram, just send me a DM to AntRenna, AntRenna. All right, guys, today on the StrengthCoach.com and NBSC.TV Coach's Corner, spoke with Coach Boyle about the reliance on technology for performance and where he's at with that. Are individual programs overrated for high-level athletes? And the football lens, what is it? And are we still looking through it in sports performance? For the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, I have on Nate Vankouwenberg. He is the founder and owner of Next Level Strength and Conditioning in Rochester. He's also the director of strength and conditioning and a physical education teacher in the Victor Central Schools in upstate New York. He's the author of Functional Strength Training for Physical Education. So we're going to talk to him about the current state of physical education, what that impact is having on kids and learning, what exactly he feels is functional strength training and why he feels like it's important for kids to learn at a young age. We're going to go over some curriculum design, some progression and regressions, and teaching guidelines. Guys, the Perform Better Functional Training Summits are here. Orlando just passed, but Chicago's coming up. I'll actually be there. I'm going to be there as an attendee. I'm really looking forward to it, getting there Thursday night. So if you're there and you see me, say hi. June 27th to the 29th in Chicago. LA is coming August 1st to the 3rd, and then Providence is the 22nd to the 24th. You can check out my interview with Chris Parrier about the new format, including new presenters, the kickoff session on Thursday with Gray Cook and Lee Burton, and a new networking and Q&A session that's literally a separate room. It's all day, and that there's no more Sundays. You can check it all out at performbetter.com. Lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, guys, now it's time for the StrengthCoach.com and NBSC.TV Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. Don't forget, you can try StrengthCoach.com out for 7 days for free. It's the same great forum as always. A lot of great discussions. Go to StrengthCoach.com for your 7-day free trial, as well as NBSC.TV. You're basically a fly on the wall at NBSC. Staff meetings, programs, seminars, and in-services from top coaches. Go to NBSC.TV for that. Coach, how you doing?
I'm doing good, but I think you were listening to me when you said fly on the wall, because I literally have a fly on my wall right now that I'm thinking of killing. So, but I'm not going to jump up. I'm going to wait and commit that crime when I'm done with you.
I should have left the I'm going to edit it out. Obviously, I edited it out for the episode, but I should have left when I opened up, you had this strange look on your face, looking up towards the wall at the flies. And I'm like, what, my coach, you ready? I want to talk a little bit about, it's interesting. I had Hunter Eisenhower on today talking about force, but it's not on this episode. It's on the next episode. You had connected him with me because we were talking about his stuff, and then we might as well get him on. And Bob Alejo posted something, and you were like, Yoda is preaching dead on. It's a people business, not a computer company. And I do like, you also posted something from Sam Walton. There's only one boss, the customer, and he can fire everybody in the company from the chairman on down simply by spending his money somewhere else. But Bob wrote, undeniable truth, technology and data are not cutting edge or game changing. understanding the data and its actionable, I repeat, actionable application to sport are game changing. Practitioners, not technology and data, are the significant influence on performance and injuries. Because sometimes this can get misconstrued. I mean, like I said, we just had Hunter on, and the idea where a lot of what he's talking about came from technology, but it did come from his thoughts on interpreting that data. So I do feel like,
Oh, sorry. I was going to say it came from his really practical use of technology, which is,
yes,
I think that's the key. And I think that's what Bob is talking about. The problem with our field right now is that it's moving in the direction of just numbers, like just get numbers, get numbers, get numbers. And it's like, okay, what are we going to do with the numbers? The numbers, I always say, the numbers have to tell a story. And then we've got to be able to use that story to make the athlete better. If not, it's just waste of time.
and where do you think, I mean, because you've slowly gotten, I mean, even the timing, that's technology, right? I mean, it's better now. I know you would argue if you didn't have a facility, you would go out into a field and you would still make them do flying tens. Obviously, you'd try and time them with a stopwatch. You'd still be technically timing them. So, there's no excuse not to do this. But just so everybody knows, where are you right now? I know because you started to kind of get into this, we haven't talked about it in a while, but the velocity based training, because you felt like you can gamify it. Talk to me about where you are. What technology are you using?
But the only technology I really use on a consistent, regular basis is the electronic timer. But if you look at what Hunter is doing, I'm using Hunter's accumulation of data for my benefit. I'm drop jumping and I'm getting, I forget, I was actually watching his presentation this morning, but let's just say I'm getting 5 times body weight or 6 times body weight or whatever it is. I don't need a force plate to know the numbers that he got. In much the same way with Alex Natera, I don't need a force plate to know what Alex derived from those force plate studies. So I think sometimes you have to look at it and think, I don't need to have the technology to use the technology. So for us, basically, what we're really doing is we're just using the electronic timers. But I am thinking when I'm listening to Hunter and he starts talking about his fast force idea, that we're going back to the idea of, okay, maybe I do need to, at least in the next phases, start to get the Vitribs back out again, the VBT pieces back out again and say, okay, let's start looking at less at, and I've always, the problem that we ran into is that the incorrect application. So when we first started with velocity-based training, people were just whipping weights around. It was terrible. It was just not good. And then what happens is people kind of keep working on it and keep refining it. And suddenly people are saying, it's not about taking 135 pounds and almost jump squatting it. It's taking a load that's more in that, let's say, 75 to 85% range, and then seeing how fast you can move that load. So it is, and it's really interesting. It goes back to, I can remember Fred Hadfield talking about compensatory acceleration in the 80s and how he was squatting. And his whole idea was, my goal is to move the weight, a heavy weight, as fast as I possibly can. And I think that's the part that we're getting at, where you think, okay, this is probably where the real value is. I was listening to Mike Guadango the other day on another podcast, and he was talking about how they're using a belt squat and they're trying to get guys going between 1 and 2 meters per second. So I think there is going to be some gamification and some change in intent when you can do this. It's just, I think what sets me off all the time usually is people go off kind of half cocked on this stuff, and then the end result isn't very good. And then I just kind of am like, oh, screw it, don't, who needs it? And then smart people kind of keep going and keep going. And I always think you don't always, I always say, you don't want to be the first person to do something. You don't want to be the last person to do something. So in the velocity-based training space, I guess we've got to look at this and say, okay, I'm not going to be the last person there. I'm not going to still be grinding reps. And I think that's the difference when you start looking at this and say, okay, I want to select weights where I'm not grinding reps. They're not slow. And I'm not looking, oh, that rep took 5 seconds. It's okay. Every one of those reps is a pretty good kind of solid punch. And we're getting it in that 0.6, 0.8 meters per second kind of range. So I think that's where we're at. But it's always, but if you look at, as I said, if you look at what we're doing unilaterally from the Alex and Tara stuff, if you look at now, starting to incorporate some depth drops. And I watched Hunter Singh. I think he was actually, it was 12 to him, and I forget what the times body weight numbers were, but he was about 10,000 newtons in his drop jump. But he was, or maybe no, he was less than 10,000. He was 5,400 when he did the single leg. So I started looking at it thinking the unilateral is still higher. The bilateral deficit idea is still there. So I'm always trying to kind of match ideas and reincorporate. So where I think I'm going, and I'll know better the week after next, is now we're going to start doing some unilateral depth drop where we start thinking, okay, and maybe the box is lower, but if I can get guys just stepping off an 18-inch box to a unilateral landing, then I'm getting the cumulative effect of a double leg off of a 36, but I'm getting it in this sort of functional way when we talk about, what the pelvis is doing and what the muscles are doing, all that stuff. I'm getting the benefit of all of that as I go.
Yeah, but even, again, going back, staying on this topic of if you did get a force plate, these are things that you now could say, hey, I'm going to take 25 kind of guys I know aren't going to, be idiots about it, but we're going to do this and we're going to find out from these 25 guys, we're going to get those numbers. And then we could start to, change our programming based on, like you said, okay, cool. Melding these ideas together. This is something that, so you could, like from a lab perspective, your own little Mike Boyle lab somewhere in the back there.
Yeah, you could. John Peloff has a Hawkins plate. We could do it. It's still not easy enough for me in terms of it's not where we are with, say, the plyomat or the just jump, where it's like you can just boom do it and
Yeah.
get numbers. There's a little more setup. So I think that's coming, where you're going to be able to get those types of numbers relatively easier. I think somebody's going to have invent a mat that isn't really a platform. Because the thing I don't love about the platforms is they're a relatively small target. So when you start looking at whatever, having groups of people or athletes jumping on them or landing on them, I'd look at it and think that's what I love about the just jump mat or the plyo mat. But we have people who on the just jump and the thing or the plyo mat, they're like 36 by 36. I've had people miss them on the landing, and you kind of look and think, how could you possibly do that? But it happens. And when you've got a force plate that's elevated, even if it's an inch off the ground, now you're running some risk in terms of ankle injuries and things like that. So I think the technology will continue to get better, and I think and somebody will have a plyo mat type of mat that functions as a force plate where you can get the data that you want. And the force plate data, people, I was saying they give you so much data, too much data, that you're looking at and thinking, wow, I've really got to sort my way through this to figure out, okay, what's valuable here, as opposed to like
Okay.
what Hunter was doing. Boom, he can okay, this many newtons, whatever it is, breaking force, simple. They've got to keep making it simple for the practitioner. That's what the mats did. That's what the timing systems did. When you get this thing and then they start showing you curves and area under the curve, and you're thinking, my God, I got to go back to college for 4 years to be able to figure out what these guys are talking about. Then you ask them to interpret it for you, and they say, well, it's not really that, it depends on what you're looking for, and it depends on what you want. And you're kind of like, what I want is easily actionable data. Show me what matters so that we can measure it and I can use it. We don't need to make it a physics class.
Yeah. And you're not completely, I mean, if I was reading Hunter's article and there was a video of him and he was talking about elasticity. And when were you, was that Functional Strength Coach 2 in
That was early.
2005?
It was 2005, 6, probably
Yeah.
somewhere. We were talking about before jump and reactivity and trying to define.
Yes.
And that's what I mean. We really haven't, in some ways, we've made a lot of progress in the sense that we can get a lot of data. And then in other ways, I feel like, oh, we haven't made any progress at all because we haven't made it simple. And that's what I like with what Hunter's doing is he's making it simple. He even said in the start of his presentation, he said it started with Dan Cleather's book Force, but Dan's book rapidly gets complex. And if
Yeah.
you're not, because it's like, I mean, sometimes a sports scientist is great to have around, but you got to have a coach around. You got to have somebody around who can look at that and say, okay, this is the real world application of what you're trying to tell me. And I don't think we're doing a great job of that yet.
Mike, one thing I kind of got out of that Hunter talk as well is, like I told you, he went into the superhero, the training, how kryptonite versus the superhero training, right? So basically, uh, picking out weaknesses and working on strengths and having. Do you feel like individualized programs, I don't want to put words in your mouth, are overrated for high level athletes in terms of are we wasting our time with some of that stuff, or do we need to individualize a little bit more? Where's the balance when we're working with these teams and these elite athletes, Mike, not like high level athletes, I should say.
It's interesting because I think the problem is there's a really big need for that if maybe the conventional meathead strength coach isn't going to do that well. So the guy who just wants everybody to squat heavyweight, and the guy who just wants everybody to deadlift heavyweight, and the guy that just wants everybody to bench press heavyweight, and the focus becomes the weight. I think what Hunter was talking about is, hey, you may have guys. I think a lot of your elastic guys do not thrive in that environment. One of the things that I noticed very early on is that your skill position guys did not love that type of training in football, that your basketball guys did not like that type of training. And so you end up in a situation where you start looking at it and saying that's where, we were calling it functional training. But in some ways, I would just look at it and think it's intelligent training that wasn't crushing somebody's nervous system, that wasn't making somebody worse. And I do believe that sometimes the old kind of power lifter, bigger, faster, stronger, that kind of thing, it probably makes your really elastic elite athlete worse. It definitely makes them feel worse. And I think in some ways it makes them worse. I talk to people all the time who talk about sending their kids off to college. They go into a conventional college strength program and they come back slower. And people say that routinely happens all the time. And part of it is because there's such a, if we were putting it kind of in Hunter's terms, there's such a slow strength emphasis. It's not even a slow force or a high force. It's just a slow strength emphasis. The emphasis all the time is move more weight, move more weight, move more weight, or accumulate more fatigue, get tired. Like I talk to people, oh, we do everything on the whistle. Everything's fast. I feel like we individualize the program for everybody. And that's as probably contradictory or oxymoronic as you possibly can get. But I really think we put together a good program that can hit both ends of that spectrum. The person who just needs to get stronger is going to get stronger, but we're not going to crush the nervous system of that really gifted, athletic, elastic type of person.
Yeah, and I think what the way I thought of it when he was talking about it was, so for example, those elastic athletes, there is a phase where they will do some of the slower force type stuff in the beginning that they don't always respond that well to. But I thought of it like in your bucket system, really for those, we have to start thinking like some buckets for them might be a little smaller. So there's some buckets that are, now you want to fill those buckets, but these buckets might be smaller. The grinding stuff has to be smaller for them, whereas the elastic stuff and the reactive stuff should be
Yeah.
higher, right?
It's funny, yeah, because the difference for us is I used to always look at it and think, I mean, long time ago, I said to people, hey, if you're not getting faster and your vertical jump's not going up, then we really have to question what we're doing. And we were always really focused on that in terms of we want higher vertical jumps. We want guys to run faster. And ideally, we'd love for them to get stronger and we'd love for them to get bigger. But we've got to look at that and think at what point. And the basketball, it's really funny. So we're seeing the perfect example of that right now in the NBA playoffs when you watch Doncic, right? I mean, he is, and they were even, I think Hunter even said it in his presentation. If you look at him,
But
he
who?
looked.
Sorry, coach. Who?
Uh, I think is it Doncic that plays
Oh, okay. Yeah.
for
Yep.
Dallas, and
Hmm.
I mean he looks big and slow, except when he has the ball in his hands. Like when you watch him get up and down the court, you think, wow, this guy really labors to get up and down the court. But yet he has this incredible ability to play the game, to turn it on and to turn it off. But if you watch Jason Tatum or Jalen Brown or you watch Irving, they're kind of your classic American basketball player in terms of really super elastic, super explosive. But you start to look and I would look at it and say, hey, if you gave me Doncic, I'm going to try to train him to be like Tatum or try to train him to be like Jalen Brown. I think training him to be like those guys would be helpful to him. But if I had Jalen Brown or Tatum, I'm just going to train them to continue to be exactly the way that they are. So we're going to try to enhance what makes them good. So it always, I think it's not as diverse as people would like to make it. I guess that's the difference. You may, in some cases, look and think, hey, I need this guy. I need a little more armor. I need a little more size. If you look at I'm not. I hope I'm saying his name right. Wabayama, who's in San Antonio. Who's 7'6", and okay, that guy got to get that guy bigger because
Yeah.
he's got a lot of. There's a lot of lever to cover, and he could probably put on 20 or 30 pounds. When you look at Giannis, the same way, like he got much bigger, but the difference is, and I always use the example of the mountain from Game of Thrones was a basketball player in Iceland and then became one of the world's strongest men. He did not become Iceland's best basketball player when he became one of the world's strongest men. He probably got worse at basketball. So
Yeah.
we've got to be looking at we always have talked whatever buckets, scales, risk benefit. I mean that all the things that we've talked about for a really long time. To me, it just kind of comes down to common sense. You look at some of these guys and you think, hey, that guy's really skinny. Let's see if we can get him to put some weight on. But if I got that guy, hey, he's 30 and he's really skinny, I might look at him and think, he's 30, he's really skinny, he's been in the NBA for 10 years. I'm probably not going to worry about that part. Now, for him, I'm going to worry about longevity. Can I keep him healthy? Can I get him to play another year? If he was 18 and he looked like that, I'm going to think, hey, I'd love to put 20 pounds on him, that he could carry around with him for the next 10 years. If I look at some of these guys and think he doesn't have a great, he's got a low 20s vertical jump. Hey, let's get that vertical jump up. Let's try to be more explosive. But I'd be looking at the guy with the 40-inch vertical jump and thinking, I wouldn't mind getting him to 42. So I think in some ways it's not as different as everybody makes it out to be. I guess that's my
Yeah.
point.
Cool. Coach, really quick on this one. You mentioned about we're still, I think it was a tweet, we're still looking at things through the football lens. A lot of coaches are. And there was another article you kind of referenced, Brandon Marcello, about the Navy SEALs. You said the interesting thing about Hell Week, military style training, it's not really training, it's tryouts. Once you make the team, you never train like that again. That might be a lesson for team sport coaches. So I felt like these two were very similar, like this very kind of this is the way we've always done it, or that kind of not meathead training, but that football lens. Are we? I mean, have we seen it? Is it getting better at all, or because like, even you're still? And I've asked you this question a couple of years ago. I think every couple of years it comes up. Are we getting any better? Are we still looking at things through the football lens? It seems like we've gotten away from that.
I think it's getting better slowly, but I think there are some really regressive people in the field and I still think, and I feel terrible because I love our military and I think I have the largest amount of respect possible for our special forces people. I just think that that's not a way to train athletes. And so I don't want to come off as being anti-military, but I am very much anti-military training. It's like, the whole mental toughness thing. We're going to learn how to work. I just don't buy into that whole thing. And then the football thing is just the strength for strength's sake and or the combination of strength for strength's sake and the mental toughness component. So now you're combining two, in my mind, really bad ideas. And I wrote about it today. I said the one thing about that type of training is that what it's probably going to do is produce some injuries. It's probably going to do exactly what you didn't want them to do. Nobody's going to get mentally tougher. Your team isn't suddenly going to turn into a bunch of Navy SEALs who are ready to go blasting through a door and take down Osama bin Laden. Like, that's not going to happen because you brought some group in for 2 days of crazy hard training. But at the same time, if you lose 2 or 3 kids to injury, because the one thing I realized whenever we tried to do anything that was effort-based was that our people who produced great effort were the people who are most likely to hurt themselves. Because when you take somebody who's a really strong competitor and you say, I want you to do this till you can't do it anymore, that person will generally exceed their capacity and will probably get injured. I've talked to tons of special forces people, and that's one of the things that I've said to people is that the last thing you want to do is take somebody like that, take somebody with that special forces, that absolutely unique 1% mentality, and then say to them, do as many of these as you can possibly do. Because that type of person will really probably do some damage to themselves. So I look at it almost in the reverse. Our job, once we figure out, once we have our hell week and we figure out who these people are, then our job is to protect those people from themselves from a training perspective and be able to say, hey, I know that if I said to you, do this, until you're unconscious, until you're vomiting, you would do it. But that's not what I want you to do. I need you to be healthy so that when the time comes where you have to swim or jump out of a plane or do whatever it is that you're going to do that makes you so special, I want you to be able to do that. I don't want you to be injured and unable to do that. And that's what we were seeing. There was a big CrossFit component in special forces, let's say 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was a real problem because the idea of CrossFit, the whole as many as you can, as fast as you can for time, that kind of stuff, really kind of fed the beast in a bad way for some of these really super mentally tough people. And it was a really, really bad combination of training processes in terms of taking someone who's very, very good at pushing themselves and then giving them some sort of arbitrary challenge that involves pushing themselves.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see where the military kind of standards have gone and kind of,
Yeah, the military is getting better. Everything is getting better. It's just not fast. And
yeah.
it's very pendular. I was writing, like I said, I'm contemplating functional strength coach 8. And that's one of the things I've thought about is just this whole idea of the pendulum. Like suddenly we're fighting about aerobic training. And I'm like, oh my God, we keep going back. People just keep wanting to make aerobic training important again. And then there are all these things that you just look at and think they just kind of keep going back and forth in terms of, I'd like to just see them going forth.
Good
And not
stuff. All right. Well, we'll go forth here, Coach. We appreciate you coming
well,
on.
I
And
have to have a couple of dog edits in there, but between the dogs and the flies.
that's all right. I'm a dog person, as you know. So, Coach, we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. Now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment. And I have on Nate Vankouwenberg. And Nate is the founder and owner of Next Level Strength and Conditioning in Rochester, New York. He is the director of strength and conditioning and physical education teacher at Victor Central Schools in the Rochester area, obviously. He is the new author of Functional Strength Coach. Oh, man. Wow. Functional Strength Training. See, that just comes right out. Strength Coach comes right out. Functional Strength Training for physical education from Human Connects. Did a great job with that. We're going to talk all about that. He was also the RIT men's hockey strength coach from 2015 to 2023. And he's been a big part of strengthcoach.com and big, part of Mike Boyle's stuff, let's call it. He's a certified functional strength coach as well and been a big part of a lot of those discussions and being part of that and those certifications. So Nate, thanks for doing this, bud.
Thank you so much for having me back in. Such an honor for me. I'm a big fan of the show and big fan of what all of you guys do. So to be back, it's a huge honor. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And we actually mentioned that, like, hey, and I've been on before and we talked a lot about the same stuff, but this, the problem could be worse. It could be better. And also there's so many good reminders in here. And I think with the book, you did a great job of structuring this message now too. You kind of had that's the cool thing about writing a book, right? You kind of have to put everything now in that in kind of a good sequence.
Yeah, so when we first spoke, it was right after COVID, and this is when I kind of started thinking about, hey, I've been doing this workshop for a while. I think there's a huge need for it, seeing what people are currently doing in PE. When it comes to fitness units, maybe I should think about doing a course or a book even. And that was just kind of the beginning phases of thinking this would be possible. And, started it in 2021, and 3 years later, as you know, it's a grueling process, but great to be done, and I appreciate the feedback on it.
I will say, I probably haven't said it on the show in a while. Alan Cosgrove had the best quote for me with the book. He said, "There's only two really good times when you're writing a book. It's when a publisher says, 'Yeah, we'll do it,' and then the day you actually get that first copy. All the rest sucks."
Right.
But
I'll agree.
so Nate, I really want you to talk about and I think it's important for us to set the groundwork, but for me, I was talking to somebody about this recently, and they were really shocked, and they almost like they didn't believe me. And I want you to talk about the current state of physical education in America. And I think this has been going on for a while in terms of not just physical education, but taking recess away. And you're saying, but we'll stick with the PE for now. You can throw the recess stuff in there too, but we're stuck decades behind. Talk to us about the current state of physical education and what's going on in America.
Yeah. Well, just like fitness, just like strength conditioning, there's definitely the good and the bad out there. And, there are some amazing teachers. There are some great districts doing amazing things, awesome organizations like Shape America, like our New York State AFERD conference here in New York State. And there are other states have the same type of organization as well to really promote quality physical education for kids. So there's a lot of really good stuff out there. The flip side of that is there are a lot of programs and people just kind of there to survive, have kids come in and be active without any issues. And, that's a lot different than what we look for from a quality physical education program, where our goal is to teach kids how to be active on their own time. The state of, what our children are doing these days with all the technology and decrease in physical activity on their own, it is possible that the only physical activity they may get is in PE. So we still have to prioritize activity time in that setting. But with that said, the true goal is to get people to be active on their own time, teach them how to be healthy people into adulthood. So how do we do that? We obviously want to make sure that kids are learning. It's a structured environment where we go through a lot of different things, from psychomotor, trying to teach kids skills so they can be successful on their own time, but cognitive as well, teaching them the rules, teaching them different things they need to know to do this on their own time. And then the affective piece as well. There's a huge social emotional component to physical education that we have the ability to focus on character, leadership, cooperation, things like that in our setting. So it's much more than just getting kids in, being active, and not starting a fight, right? It's more about how can we really teach kids and inspire kids to be active on their own time, especially when most of their friends are on screens the rest of the day when they get out of school. So there's the good and the bad for sure. And when it comes to what our focus is and my focus is, it's mainly more about the fitness units. And then the same kind of deal. You get a really wide range of things that people are doing. And with my background in strength conditioning, I was able to implement quality functional strength training in the PE setting here in my district in Victor, in New York State, almost 16, 17 years ago now, and made a lot of changes since then, but been able to see what that looks like in action, right? And how can we teach kids how to strength train correctly, but also what's best for them to do this on their own time. So, we see a lot of different trends, and hopefully the trend is moving in the right direction, but I'm excited to hopefully spread the word as to specifically how can we teach kids to get the most out of their time if they are going to go into a fitness center or a weight room on their own.
Is part of the problem, is it from an administration perspective? Is it from kind of teachers that are, or physical education teachers that might have been tenured and they're in there for 30 years now and they don't want to change? Is it the physical education programs coming out that through colleges and universities that aren't up to snuff and are just kind of not that good either. Where do you see kind of that piece? Where's that breakdown there? Because we have certainly, I know you and I are in a bubble, right? People listening to this
Right.
podcast, we're in a bubble. We think, oh, come on, everybody knows this stuff, and they don't. So where do you think is a part of, or if not just all of those things, all of the above, but
Yeah.
where does it start?
Yeah, well, actually, I mean, most college programs are great. They're going through all of these things that really should be done in the educational setting. I went to Brockport State in upstate New York, proud of that, and really great PE and exercise science school. And thinking back to what we learned in school, it's all of the things that PE teachers should be doing to really promote health, wellness, fitness, physical activity for kids to do on their own time. The tough part is when you get out into the educational setting, there's not always that same level of accountability from potential administrators or other teachers. I know that when I did my student teaching experience, I just got out of school. My first building was basically a guy, awesome guy, but was there for a very, very long time on his way out. And I walked in, he's like, all right, here's your desk. I'll see you in a couple months. And it was pretty much just kind of roll the ball out, whatever you want to do that day. And think about going to math class and just being like, all right, don't get in a fight. Make sure you have your pencil and you'll be fine. It's just not how it works, right? So it's more about like how the culture of districts based on how much they value what we do. And it starts top down, right? It stops with our athletic director and our director of physical education. I'm very fortunate to have a great AD and Dewey Weimer here at Victor and my former AD, Ron Wickham. But it really starts there. And then from there, it's the pride of the teachers. So here where we are in Victor, everyone takes it very, very seriously. There's a lot of pride here. And there are a lot of districts that I've visited that are the same way. But the flip side of that, again, is like, if you get to a school being hired and the rest of the teachers there are just kind of, let's roll the ball out, let's just kind of survive and get kids moving a little bit, that's kind of the standard, right? So it's traditionally district by district based on the level of pride and accountability from the top down. And that's where we're at. So we see the good, the bad, and the ugly. So hopefully we see the trend shifting up.
And where do you, and I'm going to jump in after you, but where do you feel like is the impact of all of this on the kids and on learning?
I mean, we talk about the state of our kids right now, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally with everything going on. And the state of our kids right now, and we don't have to sit here and talk about the benefits of physical activity in general, but specifically strength training. And it's a no-brainer that if we can build some confidence in kids, we can get kids moving for all of those beneficial reasons. It's a good thing. So again, it's the weighing the pros and the cons and potentially balancing of like, how beneficial is it? I'm going to have them for 40, 60, 90 minutes. Do we just get them moving because they're not going to do anything on their own? Or am I really here to teach kids? And am I really trying to inspire kids to do this when I'm not next to them? And they have the choice to either move, be physically active, or jump on a screen, right? So it's really that balance. And, through a quality program with a, quality curriculum and direction, I'm very confident that you can do both, right? You can teach kids how to be active on your own time. They can have a ton of fun and they can be moving most of the class. And that's really the goal of a quality PE program for sure.
Yeah, two things I probably didn't really think about as much because I don't have kids, so I guess I'm not just thinking about it, but I love this idea of setting them up for, later on, like get them involved in this now to learn this. So the barrier for entry or going to a gym, for example, wouldn't be as intimidating. And then
100%.
the confidence piece, I guess, too, is I didn't even really think about that with so much bullying going on and it's so important for kids to be able to have that confidence and to be able to, and strength will do that for you. It'll give you some confidence, maybe sometimes too much confidence. But.
True story. And I think another big piece of that too is exposing kids to a wide range of activities. Like when we were in school, it was here's roll the ball out. You're going to play football for the next 12 weeks, or you're going to play basketball for 12 weeks. And like team sports are awesome. There's so many benefits physically, emotionally, socially there. But when it comes down to it, not everyone likes team sports. So how can we expose kids to a bunch of different things where hopefully they take away a couple that they do enjoy enough to do on their own time? So that could be individual sports, that could be lifetime activities. And obviously fitness is a massive part of that. And that's obviously what we're focusing on here. So
Yeah, I just want to read. I'm actually took out this book. I can't really see it from there, but Brain
oh
Rules
yeah.
from John Medina. And the first chapter, John Medina is a brain scientist, and this is an older book, like 20 years old, but it's 12 principles for surviving and thriving at work, home, and school. And what he had said originally was, if you wanted to set up the worst possible work environment, you would design an enclosed office with cubicles. If you wanted to design the worst possible learning environment, you would design a small room with a bunch of chairs that kids are stuck in. And that would be the absolute worst. In the first chapter, he talks about exercise, but I want to mention this about recess because I feel like it's, along the same lines with a lot of schools cutting out recess. But he said because of the increased reliance on test scores for school survival, many districts across the nation are getting rid of physical education and recess. Given the powerful cognitive effects of physical activity, this makes no sense. Yancey, the model turned physician, scientist, basketball player, describes a real world test. They took time away from academic subjects for physical education. And they found that across the board, physical education did not hurt the kids' performance on academic tests. When trained teachers provided the physical education, the children actually did better on language, reading, and the basic battery of tests. So the research is there that this is super important. And it's a shame that first of all, that a lot of those programs have been cut. And then, like you talked about, that we might not have always the people, the quality people, kind of implementing some of this stuff.
Right. Yeah, 100%. I can't agree more. The benefits are there. And that's, we'll talk a little bit about the process when it is like, how can we implement this into a program? And it's all about selling it to the kids, selling it to the other teachers, whoever you're talking to. And that list of benefits to obviously any type of fitness, but specifically strength training, that cognitive piece is a proven fact. And that was another interesting part of writing the book, is having to go through and cite all these things are true, right? And that's a time consuming piece as well. But the proof is there, right? So we have to continue to sell that to our kids.
Yeah. Well, the book is called Functional Strength Training for Physical Education. So I want to start out really by defining, I want you to define what functional strength training is and what does it really though mean to you? Because I know you can start out with the actual definition of it, but what does that mean to you? And hopefully you'll bring up the barbecue in the bathroom analogy.
Yeah, and functional strength training is definitely a buzzy term in fitness, and Coach Boyle and Kev Carr and all those guys do a really good job of preaching what it is and why it's important as well. And I talk about in the book, I talk a lot about Coach Boyle and what you guys do in CFSC, but looking back to when I first came out of college and thought that functional strength training was if I were to put someone on a Bosu ball doing curls, right? And how Coach Boyle's first book had someone on like a balance board doing something. And, I remember back in the day, that's what we thought. It was something where you're balancing and it's making your brain do different things. And that could potentially be part of it. But what we've obviously come to know is functional, that the word functional means it serves a purpose, right? So when we talk about functional strength training, it's using exercises that are actually going to relate to my everyday tasks, that serves a purpose related to what I do. Now in athletics, when we train athletes at next level, and as a lot of people listening to the show do, that's pretty simple, right? We want our athletes to be better at their sport. We want them to be faster, stronger, more powerful, all those things. Physical education is a little bit different because you do have athletes there and we can sell it to them that way, but you also have people who could care less about how fast they are or whatever the case may be. So now we have to kind of dial into what does that person want and what do they do on a daily basis. So it's all about serving a purpose related to their everyday lives, using multiple muscle groups and realistic patterns at once. So, my analogy you're talking about is my wife actually went to school for interior design before she actually went into education. And the amount of times I have to hear why something in my house isn't functional when I move something is I'm over it, right? But, the functional place for my grill is my backyard. It's not my bathroom, right? So although that could be pretty cool, it's not where it belongs. And similar to strength training, what we're really battling against is we're battling against the old school machine-based strength training, and that's the whole purpose why I really started the workshop years ago. And now the book is that the majority of PE programs, when it comes to strength training, that's all machine based. They're plopping kids on machines, one muscle group at a time. And trust me, there are plenty of amazing PE programs out there doing a ton of great things with functional strength training. But the majority of the programs that I've come across and people I've talked to, it's still a lot of machine-based stuff. So if I were to compare sitting on a machine using one muscle group at a time, or performing compound movements, squats, deadlifts, pushing, pulling, all these things, like what's more realistic to my everyday life, regardless of what I'm doing. If I'm an athlete, that's a no-brainer, right? My boy, Josh Allen, I don't know him personally, but a little obsessed, big Bills guy up here, isn't hurdling people because he's sitting on a machine doing hamstring curls, right? Just like if I were to sell it to a kid who's not an athlete, like who skateboards here, who snowboards, who does martial arts, who's a cheerleader, who does gymnastics, all of these different activities that these kids are doing on their own time. We're using multiple muscle groups at once. We're using realistic movement patterns. So why wouldn't we spend our time in a fitness center or a weight room doing similar things that are going to connect the dots between that and what I want to do on my own time?
Absolutely. Well, when we look at these things, in the book, you talk about some of the positives and the negatives. And I think and I'm assuming this is why a lot of them are machine based. It's why a lot of the big boxes, a lot of times, or if you go to a condo development that has a gym, a lot of it ends up being machine based, right? Because of quote unquote safety. Right.
And
is that the excuse that they're giving for the kids? I mean,
it comes down to what's easier, right? And just like step one for me anytime, and the whole point of this book was definitely, it made me take the workshop and then break it down in like a step-by-step process. Wanted this to be a very digestible, easy to follow manual for PE teachers and strength coaches at the high school level. And step one is always going to be like, why does strength need to be part of your program? And a lot of teachers are still maybe not even doing machine-based strength training. They're just throwing them on cardio equipment or whatever the case may be. So step one is why strength. We all know the benefits. We don't need to go through them here. But step two is, okay, strength is important. What are our options, right? And again, the easy option with very few barriers is the machine. You can just throw them on it, safe. They really don't need to know what to do. But then there are other options, obviously, functional strength training, which we'll talk about. But then there's powerlifting, there's Olympic lifting, there's CrossFit and everything else. And, talking about those different options is step two. And then really proving that functional strength training is what is the best bang for the buck for most of your kids. Like powerlifting, Olympic lifting is great, but how many of your students are going to be competitive powerlifters or Olympic weightlifters? So really kind of dialing it into what is ideal for that population. The bad news there, the cons, is definitely that there are some barriers to participation. If I were to tell someone off the street that wants to be in better shape, like we should get you going on a functional strength training program. Let me know how it goes in a couple months. Where do you start there? Like, what exercises do I do? How do I perform them correctly? Because I actually have to go through the movement myself without the assistance of a machine. I have to, use a lot of different muscle groups at once. I have to balance. I have to coordinate. How many reps do I do? How much weight do I use? So there is definitely a barrier of skill and knowledge that needs to be in place before people can just go off into a gym and do this on their own. The good news is that almost every single kid in America and most parts of the world are required to have physical education. So instead of like waiting until you're an adult and you just want to be in better shape, or you're battling this injury, or now I'm an athlete and I want to perform better. Why wouldn't we start at young ages teaching the kids, first of all, why this is important, how to do these things correctly, and then how to actually implement this into your own fitness program when we have access to almost every single kid in the country at some point. Everyone that comes the next level wants to be there, or at least their parents want to be there. They can afford it, right? They have goals specific to performance in their sport. Like, that's a really small percentage of people compared to how many students there are that PE teachers have access to.
What's been, even in some of the lectures, maybe what was some of the pushback that you've gotten? Like, wow, no, we can't do this type of training.
Yeah, I think because it's harder. It's easier to just throw a kid on a machine, and you have a whole room of machines. You have circuits; they're numbered. You bring them in. You say, "Okay, guys, follow the numbers of the circuit. I'll be over here if you need anything." That's pretty easy to do. Anyone can do that. So I think it's more work, and especially if you don't have a strength and conditioning background like I do, you have to learn this stuff in at least the bare minimum to do this correctly and do it safely. So I think it's more work. It's more difficult for teachers to implement than just throwing on a machine. The other thing I think is the misconception, and I've done this with a ton of different teachers, and you would assume that PE teachers know the latest when it comes to fitness and things, and that's not always the case. So there are a ton of misconceptions out there that are still alive in the PE field, from things like spot training, or females are going to gain all this muscle mass if they strength train, and all the things that we've heard from terrible fitness people out there as well. But those are still around. So I think another big part of it is breaking down some of these old school misconceptions when it comes to the myths that are still out there.
So let's say let's jump into, okay, we're past we've set the foundation. We're ready to go. I want you just to kind of go over. You have a chapter all on curriculum design with the different, and just mention the ages, et cetera, that you feel like should be when they should be starting this type of stuff. And so how do you set this all up? Because the curriculum design has got to be the biggest bear out of everything to kind of figure out what do we have and then go from there.
Right. And part one of the book is really just why strength training, why functional strength training, some functional strength training 101 that can apply to anybody that wants to do this stuff, that trains athletes, anyone. But part two is definitely PE specific. And it's a different language. It's a totally different setting and situation than I would do at Next Level or people would do in their training facility. It's a different ballgame. It's apples and oranges. So how do I take functional strength training, the same exercises, the same benefits, all of these different things that we know as strength coaches, and how do I apply it to that specific setting? And really the start of it comes down to progressions and regressions, just like CFSC preaches how important that is, and that's how we build all of our programs and everything else that we do. And it's really taking our movement patterns and it's breaking down skills from basic to complex, and then it's figuring out how can I fit this into a PE program. Speaking to PE teachers that are brand new at this, right? That's where you lose people, to be totally honest, because having a sequential curriculum is a really, really hard thing to do because it requires the work to put it together. It requires communication between teachers and even buildings within your district. It's a lot of work. So what we start with is like, listen, you don't need a sequential curriculum to introduce this to your kids. Like if right now you're doing nothing, you're pure machines, you have no idea what other buildings in your district are doing, start by switching out a couple machine exercises by a couple functional movements, and you should be proud of yourself, and let's see how it goes and build from there. But if you're a progressive district, if you're a go-getter in your district, building a curriculum isn't as hard as people think it is. It's, again, piecing out what are my progressions and regressions in these different patterns and categories, complex to basic, and then how does that plug into different grade levels that we're going to be introducing to students. So the categories are as simple as it's going to be, I'm going to have a knee dominant, a hip hinge, an upper body push, an upper body pull, a core, something powerful, and then a concept. Because remember, we need to teach the why here so that they can do this on their own time and believe that it's important enough for them to choose over technology. So those are really the categories for each age group. We always start with the top of the pyramid. We start with, what do I want my kids to be able to do when they graduate as 12th graders? So these are going to be our more complex variations in the different patterns and categories. From a cognitive standpoint, I want my kids, when they leave, because I'm not going to be with them anymore, to be able to design their own program. What exercises do I select? How many reps should I be doing? How much weight should I be using? When do I change exercises? How do I tailor things for my specific goals? So that's the end goal. Then we design down, right? So for each movement pattern and category, what's the next, basically the regression of that skill, and then all the way down to the ground floor. And then we deliver it up. So design down, deliver up. And then we start at kindergarten, and then we work our way, we build on top of skills and concepts from previous years until we get to that end result. So that's basically how it works. Now, the tough part is you can't just in the book, I've got several examples of really quality curriculum maps that anyone can plug in, blank templates that people can use. But the tough part is that every single district is different, right? Based on like how grades are set up, how long classes are, how long units are. There's no like standard piece to that. So it's got to be variation based on your situation and your logistics, but letting teachers understand that, hey, even if I have, give me an upper body, give me a lower body, give me a core and a concept, I'll get my warm-ups in, or my power in and my warm-ups, maybe some ladders, some jumps, whatever, some sprints, then I'm doing a really, really good job. So it's really based on the situation, but it's as simple as taking progressions and regressions and then assigning them to grades. So simply, let's say I'm a 7th and 8th grade teacher. I know what they've already done before they got to me, even though I've never had them in class before. I know that they've already been introduced to, let's say, a body weight squat, an elevated push-up, TRX row, a plank, whatever the case may be. I know that they've already done that. And I know that next year, when they go to 9th grade, that they're going to be introduced to, let's say, a split squat, we could go on and on as far as progressions go. How do I fill in the gaps? How do I connect the dots so that we're building on top of each other, and then just delivering from there? Reviewing skills they've learned before, even introducing skills that they may learn in the future years, but really focusing on the core variations for that age group at that time to dial in their skill level and then continue to build on their cognitive knowledge as well.
Yeah, I love the integration with the different levels, the different grades. Like you said, I mean, this is not just, hey, you're a middle school teacher, that might be the case. Somebody might be sitting out there who teaches middle school PE and wants to do this stuff. It shouldn't be a barrier of the fact that you're not going to have the kindergarten or the elementary kids or the high school kids doing it, but you got to start somewhere. But I love that, like you're saying, it's so great. Say, hey, I already know this is part of the curriculum that they did in the elementary schools. I know what they're doing in high school. This is what I'm going to put in here.
And the elementary piece is obviously a different ballgame, right?
Sure.
So people ask us all the time, when should this start in PE, where I'm actually teaching skills, practicing skills, giving feedback and things like that? We say somewhere in the middle school area, right?
Yeah.
6th grade, 7th grade, depending on how your district works. You can start to introduce this stuff in 4th and 5th grade, but maybe in like stations or warm-ups, like introduce the cues of a squat or whatever the case may be. Do it body weight, have them actually learn how to do an elevated push-up, but it's not necessarily like a focus skill that we're going to continue to practice and repractice. You're just introducing it. The elementary level is way more about how can I get kids to use their body, connect it to their brain. A lot of the times it's in fun games, activities. A lot of the times it's in obstacle courses, parkour. I talk a lot about Jeremy Frisch in the book, and we know that he's the man when it comes to LTAD. And, he's done an amazing job of changing the trends when it comes to what should younger kids be doing. And a lot of it's exploration. A lot of it is getting their brain talking to their body, doing these different things in fun games and activities. It doesn't need to be as structured, not just physically, but also mentally. Like getting a second grader to sit there and continue to drill on certain exercises isn't realistic. But to have more structure to it than just being like, yeah, just do some obstacle course, then I'm sure they're going to learn a bunch of stuff that'll apply later on, or skip and gallop. And a lot of teachers are already doing that. But to be very intentional with what you're doing in those obstacle courses, parkour, relay races, challenges, and implementing different foundational movement patterns into those games, activities, obstacle courses is important. And one of Jeremy's tweets a while back took some things like, crawling is the foundational variation of, let's say, a push-up. And like climbing a rope is obviously a pole, and jumping over something could potentially be like hip extension, and going under something could be a knee dominant movement, right? And I don't mean to quote him, because I took what he put and kind of made it my own a little bit, gave him credit for it, but still, basically, like, if I'm going to be putting together this obstacle course, let's make sure we're getting some of these foundational patterns in there of a push, a pull, a knee dominant, a hip hinge, something powerful, something that's intentionally getting to coordinate opposite sides of their body, where we know how important that is. The kids will never know why they're doing it, right? But they're being introduced to these really foundational movements and concepts that will, apply to when we do start turning this into more structured teaching of skills. They already have these physical abilities from some of that foundational stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. When I had the gym and I worked with kids under 10, we did these obstacle courses based on the Titleist, the Cyclone. And so it was like, one station was where they had to hit they had a hockey stick in their hand. So they sprinted to this one area. They came in, they had to do 3 push-ups, pick up the hockey stick, had to shoot it. Then they had to kick a soccer ball. They went on a balance beam. They crawled under something. They did like 3 TRX. They had a jump. They did a rolling thing across the mat. They had to jump on these balance things. So to your point, it was very structured and like, what are the boxes I want to check? And that was really based at the time for me, was based off of the Titleist Cyclone, like we got to get them to throw something, got to get them to kick something to strike on the ground, strike in the air, push, pull, that type of stuff. So, and they absolutely love it. I actually posted the video to Facebook, and every once in a while it comes up on memories. It's from, I don't know, 12, 13 years ago. All the girls are in college golf now. Were all like the top. These 4 girls that I had, they were amazing. And they're all great golfers. Not because of what I did. They were training with they were taking lessons, etc. But it was I can't tell you how much fun they had, and they enjoyed being in the room.
Exactly.
So, all right, cool. I love that piece of the curriculum design. Let's talk about before we get into more of just. I'll let you do an overview of the book, but just some teaching guidelines, because you did put a chapter in the book just on that. And I do think it is important, because we're trying to, you don't have that much time, obviously, with them. We're trying to really get good bang for your buck. And we want to make sure we do this right to kind of inspire them, like you talked about before, to hopefully do this on their own, to hopefully inspire them to like later on in life, etc. So talk to us about some of the things that you think are important for those guidelines.
Yeah, and again, like the fitness center and the weight room is very foreign to a lot of PE teachers if they don't have the background that a lot of us with a strength conditioning background have, right? It's a foreign type of a space for some people, and it's important to make sure that we understand how to manage that space well, how to set up a lesson for ideal flow. And what's super weird to me actually is like PE teachers are absolute magicians when it comes to things like external cueing, even progressions and regressions. Like that's what we do. But when it comes to strength training specifically, it's like that all flies out the window. They turn into these wannabe kinesiologists, like trying to show people that they do know a little bit about the body. And like, as we know, that it's not how people are going to learn. I took a ton from Nick Winkelman and Brendan with their books, Language of Coaching and Coaching Rules, and how much they talk about external cues. And there's a ton of talk about external cue in my book, as well as including external cues for every single exercise that we map out. But teachers already do that with every other unit. So giving them these external cues that can be consistent across the board in their district is huge. And then also that are going to connect with the kids and that can really help them retain that information down the road. But even the way that you set up the area. So like imagine you're teaching a kettlebell deadlift to middle school kids for the first time, and you show them the exercise and then you just like let them go and practice it. It's going to be a total melee. But if I can line up stations in linear areas, I can have, first of all, everyone organized where it looks good. Second of all, I can manage where I want specific kids based on potential like behavior issues. But also I can literally stand in one spot, look down a line and be like, good. Oh, let me go talk to that kid. Right? Instead of just kind of managing chaos. The other thing too is, which is wild, that PE teachers would never do this in any other unit, is a lot of times, even with functional strength training, they just put them into like stations, right? So it's like, okay, we're going to do 8 stations today. Here's a squat, here's a deadlift, here's a bench, here's a chin up, blah, blah, blah. All right, go ahead. And, by the time they get to the second exercise, they forgot everything, even if they are teaching quality cues. So just like every single unit, if the skill is brand new, we demonstrate it, we give them external cues, they go and they practice it. We provide feedback. We come in, we give more feedback, we give them another chance to practice. Everybody does the same skill. Then we move on to the next exercise, right? And 2 or 3 in a day is plenty. And then let them apply it into a workout. The next day, or even down the road, another year or later on in the unit, when we're reviewing skills, just buzz through it. You don't need to necessarily practice right after you teach if it's a reviewed skill, but you have to give them immediate opportunity to practice the skill and receive feedback for these more compound, complex exercises before we move on to the next thing.
Very cool. Nate, you give a ton of programs and progressions, et cetera. The book comes with something that's called HK, Human Kinetics, Propel Access. So just talk to us a little bit more about what's included in this book and what that HK Propel Access gives people.
Yeah, I think it's such a cool thing Human Kinetics did is instead of just having like a part of the book in an appendix where there's all this stuff, it's more of an online resource. And instead, there's obviously documents like PDFs of curriculum maps, external cues, programs, templates that people can just print and use. But there's also videos and pictures. So when it comes down to one of the biggest barriers for teachers implementing quality functional strength training in PE is they're not overly comfortable with their ability to demonstrate skills, or they're not overly comfortable to take the exercises and plug it into a program, right? So this is already taken care of. We already did it for you, right? So basically, if a teacher doesn't want to demonstrate it, there's a video of me teaching it and a student demonstrating it for every single exercise outlined in the book. Same thing, there's pictures with external cues listed right on it. People can print it and post it. And it's basically taking all of these excuses we've heard for years why teachers aren't going to do it. It's throwing them out the window. You don't have that excuse anymore. So it's got all of these different resources. Programs both for phys ed, where it's a general class. You probably have some athletes in there, but you also probably have some kids that have never done this stuff before. How can we take the skills that they've learned and plug it into a quality program? And it's as basic as make sure we have a knee dominant, a hinge, a push, a pull, a core, a power. And then if you want to jump on a cardio machine when you're done, cool, go for it. If you want to throw in some curls when you're done, cool, go for it. But that's the dessert, right? That's what we do when we're done with the meat and the potatoes. So all of those resources are there for anyone that decides to buy the book, which I think is pretty cool.
Very cool. You did a great job with this. I'll remind everybody, it's Functional Strength Coach. Oh my God, I did it again. Functional Strength Training. I can't help it. Functional Strength Training for Physical Education, Nate Vankouwenberg. Dude, we really appreciate you coming on. By the way, thanks for sending me the book and then writing a nice note. It's always nice to get a little bit, not just somebody signing a book, but writing a nice little note. And I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate you coming on the show again and talking about some of these things that are just so important to for kids and in their development. So thanks again.
Thank you, man. And I still revisit your book often too. So I appreciate everything that you do for all of us, not just phys ed, the strength conditioning side as well. So huge honor, man. Thank you very much.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 382 of the Strength Coach Podcast. The show notes are located at strengthcoachpodcast.com. Remember, if you can, send me an email to strengthcoachpodcast@gmail.com, or you can DM me on Instagram at Antrenna, ANTRENNA. Just tell me how long you've been listening to the show. I might contact you about just some feedback about things that you might want for the future of the show, or things you like, things you don't like. So strengthcoachpodcast@gmail.com. Special thanks to Chris Party and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, Chicago, June 27th to the 20th. I'll be there. If you're there, let me know. Come up and say hi. LA, August 1st to the 3rd, and Providence, the 22nd to the 24th. You can check it all out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Nate Van Krallenberg for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning, performance enhancement, and functional strength training. That's going to do it for this episode. I'm Anthony Renna. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.